listening to the ProgAxia podcast. Best progressive rock of 1973.
So here we are, Andy and myself, and we're here to talk about the best prog of 73. And I think, Andy, we're going to have to do this in two halves, aren't we? Because there was so much good stuff. I would say that in the early 70s, prog was kind of like an early teenager sort of fumbling around in the dark. And I think by 73, it really was, it was mid to late teens, a few missteps, but by and large, really knew what it was, where it was going, and so much good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you know, because of the radio show, and the whole point of this is we're sort of backing up or doing an after show party. I guess is the only way you can think of it. On the shows, I did 1973, the best of 1973 as a show, and I put all the music in there and that sort of thing. I was quite happy with it. Went on to 1974, 75, and the rest of it. And because I'm doing that series because the 70s are so iconic. And it wasn't until I'd done that and I set it out and I got people sort of messaging me saying, well, what about this and what about this, and I'm going, oh my god, I hadn't put that in and I hadn't put that in. And to be honest, I thought I just got to do a part two, so I did a part two of 1973. So we're going to go through the ones from the very first show, and then we'll do another podcast on show two, which includes your favorite band. So King Crimson, I didn't put, it's one of those things, when I was putting the show together, it was like Lark's Tongues. Yeah, I like it, I love it, but I just put a number of tracks into a show, and it wasn't until I finished it I thought, 1973 is massive, and there is such an expansive amount of great music, not just the prog stuff, but the music in the charts was good, and all the rest of it. It was really good pop music going around at the time and stuff. So yeah, let's get into this. I'm going to go through the albums or the tracks that I played on the show, and we can talk about that and talk about the albums, talk about the band and things like that, which is what we normally do on these things. So we're going to start with Camel and the first Camel album. What was your impression of that?
Well, see, I came a bit late to the Camel party, a bit late to the Camel Oasis or whatever. So yeah, this was Camel's first, wasn't it? And I guess Andy Latimer and his mates, were probably inspired by that early stuff. I'd already heard Moon Madness, so I was sort of familiar with how they sounded, and I guess I had some preconceptions. And that first album, you could kind of see it there. Yeah, you can. That Andy Latimer guitar sound, that tone. And you can see some of the songwriting, but it was slightly different to what I was expecting, and that's fine. Yeah. So I don't know. Did you come to it the same way? Did you?
Exactly the same way. I remember buying the first album I bought of Camel was Moon Madness. Yeah. And that was because someone said you ought to get Moon Madness. It's really good, so I got it and I loved it.
And then Snow Goose.
Yeah, I bought Snow Goose and a few other things, and at the time I didn't really like Snow Goose that much. It was just too Miranding for me. It just sort of wandered off in different places. After a time, I've sort of come back to, and now I love it. It's a great album, but I didn't know anything about this album, and I bought it as a second-hand album, probably around about maybe 76, 77, something like that, So I came really late to the party with this album, but it was different to a lot of the other stuff that they'd done, but you could, as you say, you can sort of see where they were going with it.
Yeah.
But recently, because of all the stuff that we do, within prog, we're doing this show, the podcast. I'm doing the radio shows, and I'm talking to lots of different people about this stuff, just like yourself, really. And this keeps on coming up. This album keeps on coming up, and obviously, like, you got Never Let Go on there, which is probably the track that most people would know on it. I chose 6/8 purely because we talked in these shows, in these podcasts, we talk a little bit about tracks that stuck out and things like that. And this was one of those tracks that I used to put on my cassettes. I used to put
the mixtape.
Compilation cassettes, and 6/8 was one of them I used to put on there because it's just jaunty and I really like it. And but it is a different type of sound for Camel. And I think coming in from further in the future and sort of going back to this, it was a little disappointing when I first heard it. Having listened to it a lot over the years now, I do love it. I think it's a really good album, but it is a little different, I guess.
It is, and I think the vocals let it down a bit as well. So
Yeah.
it's one of those. So if anyone hasn't heard any Camel, I wouldn't recommend starting there. I would recommend, hey, what you and I did. I'd start with Moon Madness. That I think the peak for them. And if that floats your boat, then go back in time. But it's not a standout for me. It's more of a completist type of thing. And I'd say the vocals let it down, but that guitar tone, and if you like that style of music, it is really well done.
Yeah, because I bought Mood Madness and Rain Dancers at the same time.
Right.
And Rain Dancers is, to me, my entry level. That's where I got into it, and it's probably one of my favourites. I really love that album. So I bought those two at the same time, and then I went back and yeah, it's not where I would say start, but I think for that year, for 1973, I think that it's got to be in the show. It's got to be at least in one of the shows, and if it wasn't in the show, it'd be an honourable mention at the end of them. Because it's to me, it is a bit of a classic album, but as you say, the vocals do let it down a little bit. But you could really, really see where they were going with it, and I think that's why I put it into the show, and I think it's definitely worth it. But not probably one of the albums that I'd say was their best.
But what I think is noticeable is there's a lot of love out there for Camel. So as people probably know, Andy Latimer had some rather debilitating illness, and they did some comeback shows, and they were kind of tentative, from what I understand, about embarking upon this, and they were blown away by the number of people that just wanted to come and see and basically say thank you. Perhaps not so much for this album, but for the band and what they've done and what they meant to them. So there's a lot of love out there for Camel.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of love for Camel as well. I mean, they did form part of my sort of growing up, my childhood and sort of young adulthood. Went to see them a few times as well, and really good shows. Just very melodic and very just beautiful. Just beautiful music. But what struck me on, because we do a lot of research with these sort of things, we go back and listen to all these albums again and just sort of try and remember what it was like to listen to them for the first time and things. And the thing that sort of struck me when I listened to this album was, Doug Ferguson and Andy Ward, that rhythm section was just so together and so smooth and so I don't know, just so solid in a way that I don't think there was a lot of bands doing that sort of thing, which was just really locked together, really nice. And then you got Pete Bard and stuff and Andy Latimer over the top of it, and it was. And listening back in it now, the music on it, as you say, the lyrics the vocals maybe let down a bit. The music on it is absolutely superb, and you can definitely see the direction they were going. So all in all, a really good album, I think.
But here's a contrast, though, isn't it? I mean, I don't know about you or anybody else, but can I remember where and when it was that I first heard Moon Madness or something? I can't really. But no, the next album on the list.
Yeah, next album.
Can I remember where I was when I first? Absolutely. I was 14 or 15 years old.
For our audio listeners.
Oh yes,
we're talking about Dark Side of the Moon, or The Dark Side of the Moon. Probably one of the most iconic albums ever. I mean, it's probably outsold most other albums, apart from probably Michael Jackson or something like that. But so when you first heard it, where were you?
Yeah, so I was 13, 14, maybe 15 years old, holding up the poster that comes within it, and I was on a school exchange. On those, I don't know if they at your school. We went over to France, and I was staying with some. And France was sophisticated. They smoked different types. They smoked Camel cigarettes, And I'm staying with this family, and the father had a wonderful sound system. It was probably Bang & Olufsen or something, and he had this album, and I was remember sitting there going, wow. And I mean, I don't know how much his family loved the music, but he had a young English guy just going, can you play that again, please? I mean, from the start all the way through. So moments in time that you never forget, that album. Same for you?
I don't remember the first time I ever heard it. I remember sort of like a big moment in my life when I recognised it as an album. I didn't really know too much about Pink Floyd at the time, to be honest. But I remember being at a party and really getting into it. And again, this was probably something like 75. I would have thought something like that. I didn't hear it at the time, although. Having said that, trying to think back on it, I probably did hear Money or something on the radio, or I probably heard something, but I didn't really equate it to Pink Floyd, the most iconic album, blah blah blah, all that sort of thing. But I remember going to the party and feeling a little bit out of it, as you do at parties in them days, and it got quite late, and all the rock stuff had sort of come on. We were taking it down a little bit. And I remember someone putting Dark Side of the Moon on, and I'd never really sort of listened to it all the way through. But it started at the beginning, and it went from, talking to people, chatting with people, drinking and, having a good time, to me just sitting there on this sofa, just with my head back and just absorbing this for the very first time, really. And it blew me away. I mean, it was, even though I was in the middle of a party, the party just sort of faded off into the distance, and I was just focusing my whole cerebral consciousness on this wonderful album. And just almost straight away, I went out and bought it, like most people, and I had been doing for years. I mean, you listen to it, you go and buy it, and I remember picking up the cover and sort of just thinking to myself, this is just. Normally you have bands on the cover, in them days, you'd have the band on there. And this was a completely different cover. When you open it up, it's completely different. The listening experience is completely different. So it was one of those albums that had a moment in my life. And consequently, since then, I don't know how many times have you listened to it? I mean, genuinely.
I mean, so we're talking in the hundreds, aren't we? So this isn't one, half a dozen, in the hundreds, and it's sold so much, and there are people that still listen to it now. I mean, isn't one of those that everyone bought it because they thought they should have it. I don't know, like name some other pop music artist of the day. People bought this not just because it was the thing to have, but also because you are going to play it, and you're going to play it again, and you're going to share it with people, and you're going to think a bit more about it. And I mean, you're a drummer, and I'm a very poor keyboard player. But one of the great things about this for me was, Rick Wright's playing. Yeah, there's sort of some genius in the simplicity of it, and it's not that simple. But now I was listening to this, and it drew me in many ways. And part of it was me thinking, I could be someone like him. I could sort of compose this stuff and play this stuff. And the truth of the matter is, I could only just about half play it, never mind compose anything like it. But when you're listening to those tracks and what he does with them, he's such a perfect foil for the rest of the band. So yeah, one of many attractions for me, as well as the artwork, as well as the clear cleverness, the technology that was involved in it. Getting that, was it vocoder, I guess, going that for On the Run and all the rest of it. It was like nothing else I was hearing at the time.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me, and consequently over the years, I've sort of learned more about the album. And I remember listening to a radio show, probably on Radio 1 or something like that at the time, and they had these clips from the roadies. It's permeated with little talking bits, and because it's really talking about things like death and greed, and that's why it's a sort of all-encompassing album in some ways, because it's talking about the psyche of human beings, what we think about stuff. And I remember hearing these little clips, and there was one from a guy called Roger the Hat, and he said something, and it's on the album. He said something like, I'm not worried about death. I don't think about death, and all that sort of stuff. And those sort of little things really affected me, because the music that I've done over the years has always included little bits of found sound, little talking bits, and you know, it's like with last album we did, like, the first track on it has little bits of presidents and things like that, and it all comes from listening to this album. You know, this is the album that it really did make a massive difference to me. So ever since then, you know, whenever I do anything, I always think about, can I get some little found sounds to put into the music, just to give it a bit more mystery and things like that. So it did really affect me. But those sort of things were incredibly interesting. These little bits of vocal that come in, you know, and you hear about how they did it by interviewing the road crew and asking them
Yeah,
questions about greed or death, or, you know, all those sort of things.
I think this is right. It wasn't just sort of their road crew. It's also there happened to be a band in the studio next door, and they invited those people to come in as well. And it was some bloke called McCartney, and so Macca was next door, and they had him and Linda in, and they're asking them similar sort of questions. But I think because now Paul and Linda were just a bit worried about how this might be used. You know, their responses were really quite sort of guarded and.
Right.
But when you had the roadies in there, you know, the Mad Roger and all the rest of it, and they just went off on one and said whatever, you know, came to mind. I think that's right. It was McCartney. What was they've been recording in '73? I don't know, but anyway.
Probably Band on the Run or something.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. So Band on the Run was
wasn't it?
Band on the Run was out in Nigeria, wasn't it? 'Cause they had lots of problems and stuff. Anyway, yeah. So so you had, you know, sounded like airports and train stations and all that stuff going on, and definitely one of those when you got to the end of it with those, you know, wonderful sort of chords and you got Eclipse, and you just want to go back to the beginning again. And and the album artwork, of course, you know, you open it up and it sort of goes around anyway, doesn't it? All sort of like makes you want to start again. The artwork is so good that a mathematics nerd of 14, 15 years old, whatever I was at the time, the artwork was so good. It took me years to finally work out there was a colour missing on the rainbow. You know, there's only 6, there should be 7. It was so good, I didn't even notice. I still hang my head in shame, Andy, to this day. It took me so long to see that.
Yeah, no, and also you got things like Great Gig in the Sky, and you know, all that sort of stuff. And I mean, just layers and layers and layers of greatness that go into it. It's just such an iconic album. When we first discussed sort of putting, you know, talking about Dark Side of the Moon, I was thinking, what the hell can we say that is different to, you know, what's been said in the past? And it's true. I mean, people have been talking about this for years. It's one of the probably the most iconic albums. One of the things that really strikes me as well is, you know, when you go around people's houses, and the first thing I always used to do was look at their record collection, because you can sort of judge people a little bit by the sort of records they have.
Yeah, the records in the books, that's what you look at. Yeah,
records.
What type of person are you? The window into your soul.
I remember going around people's houses and sort of just like, the records are up here, so I'd flick through the thing and I'd be going, oh god, no. I sort of know, you know, what they like and things like that. Oh, Dark Side of the Moon. Oh, that's weird, because they have Demis Roussos next to it. You know? I mean, it'd just be just this amazing record collection that I'm not my cup of tea whatsoever, and Dark Side of the Moon. So a lot of people who weren't that aren't prog fans would buy all their normal records, their Frank Sinatra's, and, you know, whatever they wanted to do, and then suddenly you see this Dark Side of the Moon sticking out, and it's like, how could they like that and all this other stuff? But it did transfer.
Yeah, but I think it's one of the things that's interesting with prog fans and Floyd fans. You know, debate how prog or Floyd, but I think it's one of those things it's curious, isn't it? Because you know, you grow up and you're a Floyd fan, and you're desperate to find somebody else who likes Pink Floyd so you can talk about it. And someone say, I'm a Floyd fan. Oh, brilliant! I've got Dark Side of the Moon. Fantastic. What do you think of the other stuff? What other stuff? You know, what do you think about Syd Barrett and Saucer? I have no idea what you're talking about. Atom Heart Up? No. But I've got Dark Side of the Moon. It's like, oh,
this is the other thing, you know, the older stuff at the time for me, I didn't really sort of get into it. I mean, I loved Echoes, and I think Echoes, we spoke about Echoes being sort of the gateway to doing something like Dark Side of the Moon. I loved Obscured by Clouds, but although I've told you that I think that the tracks are too, they haven't explored the tracks. It's like, this is an idea, this is an idea, this is an idea. But some of the music on Obscured by Clouds, again, has that sort of stepping stone into Dark Side of the Moon. But for me, it was things like, Animals and Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon, which were, for me and my age, those three albums sort of encapsulated exactly what Pink Floyd were for me, and they're my three favourite albums from the band. And everything else is sort of secondary, forward and backwards has sort of been secondary to me. Those three albums were my Pink Floyd, because of the time and the age and that age I was and what I was listening to,
Yeah. Oh, so we could probably spend a bit more. We probably ought to.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, that's Floyd done. I'll probably think of loads of other stuff when we're off, but anyway. The next one is Tales from Topographic Oceans.
All right, so I'm going to hold this one up as well. Well, we both got it. There we go. Fans. I'll do the middle bit.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about this middle bit as well. I want to talk about this as well, but
if you're a fan of this, I still haven't quite got it.
Yes, and we've talked about this in the past, and I get it. Totally get it. I understand that. I've spoken to literally hundreds of Yes fans over the last few years, and the question of this always comes up. Tales from Topographic Oceans. I think it's one of their best albums. I think it's absolutely the quintessential concept of what, to me, Yes is. We talked about Close to the Edge last time, and I love that. I think it's probably their best album, Close to the Edge. Their best album insofar as it's a concise, perfectly formed three pieces of music that you can't beat. Close to the Edge is probably the best Yes album for that. However, and you've asked me this question, if you was to be marooned on a desert island, what album would you take with you? And for me, it's Tales, and purely because it's not always just about the best music; it's about the experience of the music. And for me, this has so many good parts, so many beautiful pieces of music, and it's expansive. It's like dipping yourself into an ocean of Yes, quite literally dipping yourself into an ocean of Yes. It's a different type of album than a rock album. Close to the Edge, I think, is a very good progressive rock album. Probably one of the best out there. If I was to do my top 10, it'd be easily in the top 3, easily in the top 2. Probably number 1, but Tales wouldn't be too far behind. But it's a different psychological experience for me, and I've actually turned a lot of people, and I'm going to work on you. I have turned a lot of people who love Yes, never quite got into Tales, and I think it's because it's 4 tracks on a double album. So 1 track each side, and it seems pompous, it seems ridiculous, it seems overblown, and all those sort of things. However, I still say that you put it on, you put your headphones on, and give yourself to Yes for the time that it's on. Hour and a half or whatever it is. I don't even know how long it is. It's probably not.
About that, 120. Yeah,
it's going to be an hour and a bit, isn't it? You give yourself to Yes for that time. Just don't think about, do I like this music? Is this passage good? Is this piece a filler? Because I think a lot of things that have happened over the years is that a lot of Yes fans have listened to people like Wakeman, for instance, and saying it wasn't his favourite album. He thinks there's a lot of bits in it and things like that, and sort of got put off it. But every single moment of that is Yes, and it's beautiful Yes, and it's great songwriting. There's some fantastic keyboard bits, there's some fantastic guitar bits. Some of the guitar bits in there are just wonderful, but it's a vision of John Anderson, and it's not like just a rock album. It's almost like an experience, And as I say, I have sort of converted a few Yes fans that have said, "I'm never really good." And what's actually happened is they've never really listened to it. They've never really sat down and gone through all four sides and tried to experience it as a piece. It's a bit like classical music, like Wagner's Rings or something. Most people know little bits of Wagner, but no one really listens to the whole of it unless you're a massive, massive Wagner fan, for instance.
Yeah, and you've got a few days to spare. Yeah.
And you've got a few days to spare because that's like, so is it 7 hours or something ridiculous? So to me, this is one. It's a work rather than a rock album, if you know what I mean. It's something which it was a vision by John Anderson. He wanted to basically put the Bible, or actually the Hindu scriptures that he was getting into. He just wanted to do something like it was the catalyst to creating this. But I can guarantee that there's so many iconic pieces of Yes music within that. And if the joining parts, what people call fillers, the joining parts to me are moving from one thing into the next thing, and it's just beautiful for me. It's just one of those it's probably one of the most beautiful Yes albums, and dangerous Yes albums. There's stuff on it that it takes a little while to get into it as well, but once you get into it, it just becomes this wonderful ocean of Yes glory.
So here's the thing for me. So does it take a while to get into it? Well, it's taken 42 years and counting so far for me. And
I will turn you.
You're going to turn me. But here's the thing. So I think I get that. But the difference for me with the previous albums that you mentioned there is that, I got Fragile was, half of Fragile was a group album, and then they had their individual pieces, which they helped each other out on a little bit. Close to the Edge was a group album. You really got a sense they all bought into it and they were sort of working together as a team and in harmony. The other great Yes album for me would be Going for the One, which again I felt was clearly a great team effort. Rick was back in the fold, and Awaken is up there along with Close to the Edge for me. Whereas this album to me didn't feel like a group. It felt like, well, what it was. It was John Anderson and Steve Howe spending a lot of time together in hotel rooms, coming up with most of it, and the rest of the band coming along. Now, fair play to Alan White, because he suddenly found himself with this as his first album, and did a pretty good job. But the rest of the band, I didn't feel were bought into it in the same way. And whilst it does take you on a journey, dipping yourself or immersing yourself in the ocean of Yes, to me, it's a classic example of, it's probably a very good 60-minute album, but not for me an 80-minute four-side album. And that's for me where some self-editing, production team could have just said, hang on a minute, if we just compress this down a bit. Because I think they made a bit of a rod for their own back, Sandy, with saying, okay, we're going to do 4 sides of an album. And, as I say, I think there's a very good album and a bit in there. And to me, it's a bit like Lamb. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway for me, which would be next year's album. But for me, likewise, Lamb, side 3 just sort of meanders a bit for me, and it's all part of the whole. That part of it I get, but I just think the whole could have been a bit more for me on this album, and that's where I am. But hey,
I totally get that.
Open to being turned, but we're going to have to take turns. Me playing Lark's Tongues and Aspic to you, and you playing Tales to me, which would be an interesting musical experience.
Well, when the lockdown's done, we'll do that. But I know I totally get it. I totally get what a lot of Yes fans say.
Yeah.
But I've just always loved it, and it's one of those albums that I will put on every so often, and I will listen to the whole thing. I'll put a little bit of time aside. I might get myself a glass of wine and that sort of thing, and just put my headphones on, and I'll just disappear for an hour and a half. I just literally I just swim in that ocean for a while, and I absolutely love it. But there are some of the best pieces of Yes music on that album, and yes, you could pull it down to a single album, maybe. I still think that it's perfect as it is. I wouldn't want to sort of edit it out. I couldn't even think of where to start with that. But I think you'd have to be a little bit more dispassionate if you wanted to edit it and sort of put it down into a single album. And it would be a great album, and it would be a great album for all Yes fans. I get that, but just this little blip of wonderful, expansive, mind-altering Yes is perfect. It's just like, yeah, we can have Close to the Edge, you can have Relayer and all those things. I love all those albums for what they are, but I just think it's like this little thing that they've got that to me is a wonderful. It's just wonderful to have this. I mean, we talked about going through all this, going through all the lyrics and stuff like that. I remember sitting down and headphones, just reading this, getting involved in it, and it was absolutely beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I shall never be unconvinced.
That is not my intent. Should we move on?
Yes, yeah. Next one
ground.
is Brain Salad Surgery. Track I played was Carnival 9, First Impression, both parts 1 and 2. Yeah.
I'm gonna hold up the vinyl because I mean, great vinyl, and the artwork. I mean, this is as everyone probably knows, it's H.R. Geiger, Alien, and you can see some of the influence there. Yeah, you just keep on opening it up, and there's more to it, and inside you've got more pull-out stuff. I mean, this is, and you got this stuff which you then open up, and you got the band members, and it just keeps going.
I know. This is when album covers.
A gift that keeps on giving. You got the
huge, just album covers are so amazing in them days.
And oh my word, and a bit like Dark Side, an album that just sort of blew me away for different reasons. But it was just like, what is going on here? I want to listen to this again for slightly different reasons because. I didn't get half of it. I didn't get a chorus of it probably. And what was going on? How were they making that sound? What did it all mean? And wow, I think I probably overplayed it over the years. But you know what? I haven't listened to it for so long. I'm going to go back to it. And
I actually put it on. Obviously, to do the show, I started going through it all and that sort of thing. And getting the vinyl out and having a look at it and going through it and trying to experience what I experienced at the time when I first started listening to this. And again, I had to go back to these things. I didn't get it when it first came out. I've actually spoken to a few people who did, and it was for them totally different to anything else out there. And because of that, I think it's not just worth a mention. It's like it's worth putting it up there. I mean, the Brain Salad Surgery for me, I came in through this more. This is really the first thing I really bought from ELP, and this album's brilliant as well. I mean, just the whole cover and everything. But this is where I sort of came into it, and I remember listening to things like Takota and Jerusalem off that, and they did Carnival 9 on it, and amazing, just blew me away. Loved it. So I went out and I bought Brain Salad Surgery because I thought, I've got to get the studio album of it. But Carnival 9 is incredible. I mean, it's a 30-minute piece, and like a lot of progressive rock, and it's the sort of thing that people sort of have a go at it because it's like, call it overblown and blah blah blah. Sodom, The thing is, I love longer pieces of music, and because you get really into it. But when you read the story, when you try and listen to the lyrics and go through it and try and understand it and things like that, it's brilliant. But just on listening to it, you get a vibe. It's obviously a sci-fi backdrop to the track, and just the last part of it is mad. It's mental, and it really stimulated my imagination. That it was, computers versus man, who's going to win that battle between computers versus man and things like that. But the whole thing is just so well written, so well put together. And let's not forget, the music is astonishing. Keith Emerson's keyboards, just mind blowing. The the technicality of it all, but the musicality of it as well is just absolutely incredible. And you put
So,
that against, the bass and the drums and the vocals and everything else that goes with it. It's just a
mm.
beautiful piece. Carnival Nine is just like mind blowing.
So like you were holding up "Welcome Back, My Friends" to the show never ends, the triple live, and that was probably my entry point because just the age I was. And then, like some people do, I sort of like went back and heard the first album, heard Pictures, heard Tarkus, and I if I'd have been there at the time, I wouldn't have been able to foresee that brain salad surgery was going to be the next stopping point because it's like Spinal Tap have got their amplifiers that go up to 11. Now, this is a band with their creativity, dialed up to 11, 12. I mean, so many ideas in just a few minutes, and it was only later I learned that some of those sounds, which I assume was Emerson, was actually Carl Palmer because he was adapting his drum kit to make different sounds.
Yeah.
And it was just like, really, I didn't know that. And then of course I didn't know what brain salad surgery actually meant, and eventually I found out. And as people probably know, the album was originally going to be called Whips and Skull Candy on You, and that and brain salad surgery both are references to a certain pleasurable act that gentlemen enjoy. And they had to airbrush some of the artwork because it was a bit too phallic and a bit too graphic, and that all added to the interest and the allure. And there's more levels to this, and as well as the wonderful Carnival. There you had Jerusalem. Hey, I recognise that. That's a good start. You've drawn me in now, and it's got Benny the Bouncer on it, and it's like, let's not take ourselves too seriously. That's a bit of fun, and but then you got the Yes link with the engineering. You've got Pete Sinfield who helped with the lyrics, and that's King Crimson. And it's just like there's an interconnected world here that I'm just about getting to understand fairly. That was all part of the attraction. It was just why you listen to it again and why you read the lyric sheets and all the rest of it. I mean, just incredible creative. And for people who are relatively young, to come up, 3 people to come up with something like this at that age in their life, absolutely astounding.
That's why it's so incredible. I mean, if you take out something like Benny the Bouncer, which is, it's good to chuck in a fun track. It really is good to chuck in a fun track, and it is a good fun track. But if you look at it, you got, I mean, Jerusalem, obviously, William Blake, all of that stuff, sort of high level stuff, But you take Toccata, Ginnister's Toccata, which is just a piece of classical music, modern classical music, and the sound of that, and you got these drums that Carl Palmer was using, synthesized drums at the time, which no one else was really doing apart from probably, I don't know, maybe some early disco might have had a synthesized drum occasionally, but no one was doing any of this stuff. And it was real cutting edge stuff that no one else was doing. No one else was playing like Keith Emerson. Apart from maybe a couple of German bands that we love and we're going to be talking about at some point as well. But then you got Still You Turn Me On, and the whole this Carnival 9 suite. It's to me, it's the pinnacle, because I went back and listened to some of the older stuff, like Pictures and Exhibition, and me also Pictures and Exhibition and things like that. And I never really got into it as much as I got into this. This again. I talk a lot about my versions of the bands. It's like my version of Hendrix, my version of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and this was definitely my Emerson, Lake and Palmer. This is the level that I went in at, and just blew me away. It was I call myself a kid, sort of 16, 17, listening to this.
Yeah,
I just couldn't believe that music could do this sort of stuff. This is what interested me so much in progressive rock in the first place, because we've talked about sort of listening to music and listening on the radio in mono and listening to pop music and things like that, and then suddenly you get immersed into the world of Yes and Genesis and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Gentle Giant and stuff like that, and suddenly the world's different. It's just completely different, and music is different. And I think we've talked about this before. It's like it could be like a bit of a gateway into listening to jazz music, for instance, or to listening to classical music, which I would probably have never have walked into if I hadn't gone through listening to progressive rock. I mean, I had no idea who Ginastera was, you know.
Yeah.
So I would never have, but it made me go and listen to the classical version of Toccata.
Yeah.
So it's a gateway as well to as well as anything else.
To me, the other thing about it was, I guess I was intimidated by it. So, whereas, I could listen to Dark Side and think, Rick Wright, I could be a kind of Rick Wright type of player, I could kind of do that.
Yeah.
Even yes, Wakeman was obviously very talented, had been classically trained, even though I don't think he ever graduated. But I thought, well, that's a stretch, but maybe I could be that type of player one day. But I would listen to something like this and just go, nah, I'm never going to get there, and that's okay, because that is amazing what's going on there. I mean, the other stuff is amazing in its own different ways. But in terms of being pretty much intimidated by the level of technical ability, dexterity, creativity, imagination, it was like, wow. Just scale back my aspirations.
Again, one of the again, it would be in one of my top 10s for progressive rock. I think just incredible album. I think we better move on. So next one is Rick Wakeman.
Talking of keyboard players.
Yeah, Six Wives of Henry VIII, and I've got that up there as well. Again, this is one of those things that I put it into this show because I really like this track. I do really like this track. I've got to be honest. I'm not a massive Rick Wakeman fan for his solo stuff. I've often thought it's a little bit cartoony in some ways. It's or a little bit obvious. It's like he's done an album here which is the Six Wives of Henry VIII and Journey to the Centre of the Earth, and it's like he's watched TV on a Saturday afternoon and watched a movie and thought, oh, I'll do an album about that. And it's completely different to something like Tales from Topographic Oceans, which is much more esoteric and ethereal. This is, there's a cowboy film on. I'll write about that, and I feel that's how he does a lot of stuff. And it's not putting him down. I know there's loads of Wakeman fans who probably listen to this, but I don't think the actual album is a great album. There's some really good bits in it, and Anna Cleves was one of my favourites. It always has been. I really like it, and I've seen Rick Wakeman live, and he's played this, and he's played other stuff from other albums. So I'm not really blown away by Rick Wakeman as a solo artist. How about you? I mean, what do you think of Wakeman?
Well, the best sort of condensed version of this, as people have probably heard, is he does these sort of excerpts from the Six Wives, and he does it on the Yes Songs Live album, doesn't he? The triple set. And a bit like I was saying about the Yes connection with Tales and Topographic Oceans, the condensed version of this is brilliant. I love his excerpts because it gets the essence of each of the tracks, and he obviously put a lot of thought into how to capture the character of the Six Wives in their different ways, which is beyond my ability, and I like the distinction he draws, although perhaps it is a bit obvious. I'm going to do a bit of a comedy cartoon bit here. I'm going to do a bit, but when you have just that, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 minutes, whatever it is that he does when he does the excerpts, when he pulls it all together, that works really well for me. So, but the other thing is being a bit of a nerd and a bit of a keyboard fan. The inside, if people can see, you've got Rick surrounded by all the keyboards, and he's got all the gear and all the ideas. He knows how to use that stuff, and he does. And like you, having seen him in concert, he can effortlessly switch, and the ability to have one hand doing one thing, the other hand doing the other, and oh my word! So that side of things, I always really enjoyed. And if anyone hasn't seen him in concert, he's great fun. He's got a raconteur style to him, but his ability is clear. Different. Him and Emerson were good friends, as people probably know, even though the press, I think, at the time tried to portray them as competing against each other. They were friends, and they enjoyed what was going on in the press.
Yeah, the press tend to do that, don't they? They try and find controversy from anything. But I mean, if that shot of Rick Wakeman with the keyboards all around him is just absolutely wonderful, and and also it tells you what the keyboards are. I love
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. That was important. I needed to know that.
Look, yeah, because I think prog fans are also a little bit nerdy. I know I am. I want to know exactly what keyboards they're using, how they're using them, and that sort of thing. It's just the same as everything else, like, well, what basses are people using? What amps are they going through? I mean, maybe the musician in me, I don't know, but no, to me it's a decent album. It's a good album.
Yeah.
But Anna Cleves, I think, is probably one of the better tracks on there. And as I say, I'm not a massive fan of it. I mean, I've seen Rick Wakeman live. I mean, even signed my album here. I've got the old signature, the old John Hancock on
Right.
on my Yes Songs album. So and I do like him. I think he's a fantastic showman. Very funny. I mean, if you've never seen him, and if he's still doing his shows nowadays, I saw it probably maybe 82 or 83 or something like that.
Yeah, he was due this year to be part of the HRH Prog festivals, which, if anyone hasn't been to, they're great fun. They're sort of twice a year. Well, they used to be, and hopefully they will be again soon. So I think he's lined up for either the end of year one, which hopefully happens about September, October this year, or there's one about March, April next year. And he was due to be on the bill for that, along with some other names we'd all recognise. So yeah, he's still out there. He's still probably got alimony to pay, so he's still doing his stuff, and he does his Christmas stuff as well. And you're always going to get a good show, and you're always going to groan at some of the jokes, and that's all okay.
Next
Right.
next one is Gentle Giant in a Glass House, and well, the album off In a Glass House. The track I played was the Runaway. But In a Glass House, I know you're not a massive Gentle Giant fan. Not as big as me anyway. But do you know the track? Do you know the album well?
Yeah. So you're trying to turn me. You've got much more chance of turning me on Gentle Giant, because I'm kind of turning myself, if that's an image we can conjure with. But I am getting more into Gentle Giant. Octopus is probably my favourite. But this album, again, like we talked about Camel, Camel's first album sounds a bit different to what came later. This album, to me, sounds a bit different to what had come before. And I think it's because, well, it doesn't seem as playful. It just seems a bit more sort of like serious. But also, I think, was it Phil Schulman had left the band, which I think, so that sort of changes a bit the sound, a bit the dynamics, the interaction between three brothers, now two brothers. So I guess that's part of it for me, and I liked that playfulness. I like that we're going to do something quite intricate and baroque, but we're clearly going to have a bit of fun doing it at the same time. So I guess this album didn't quite work for me as much as some of the previous ones did. All very clever, and I get the cleverness of it, but yeah, I guess this is probably not the one I would play first to people if they wanted to sort of get into as a gateway, as a portal to the Gentle Giant world.
No,
would be fair with that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think it did lose something when Phil left. I think it had there was a sort of hole in it. But one of the things that struck me, sort of re-listening to this album, is that even though he left, and even though you can sort of, if you're a Gentle Giant fan, you can sort of feel the hole a little bit. You can feel that there's something a little bit missing in it. I think what they did on this album was to say, okay, Phil's gone. We got to. Well, I really want to bring out another album that is as good as Octopus. I want to do something which is as good as Octopus. And I think they worked very hard to get this album together and sound as good. And I think there's a lot of moments in this album which are just as good as Gentle Giant has ever been.
Yeah.
But you do feel a little bit like there's something lacking, something a little bit missing in there. But I think they consolidated and they really worked hard to make a really good Gentle Giant album. And I do love the album. I think it's one of their top albums. But probably in the sort of, if I was to do a top 10, it'd probably be in the second half of the top 10. Because Octopus was so good, and albums like Freehand are so good, and this really had a little bit lacking, but I think they tried to make up for it, and I think they worked really hard on some of the vocals and some of the instrumentation as well. But it does have a sort of harder edge as well. It has a little bit more
Yes.
kick to it, and I think because of that, I like it. If that makes sense, it's like it's a
Yeah.
little bit for Gentle Giant, and I think for that, I'd sort of like it more.
Yeah, but I think the contrast for me is that, with bands like Genesis and Crimson, I think you could see they were still progressing. They still had new ideas. They were still going to surprise, and they were going to. They had still quite a bit of runway left with them. Yeah. Whereas I think, I'm doing this retrospectively now, but now going back and looking back at Gentle Giant's career, I think they begin to tail off a bit here rather than some of the other bands. That's my take on it.
I think this was the sort of beginnings of the tailing off, but
Yeah.
I don't think they tailed off in this. I think they've done something different.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
There was this little hole. Well, I say this little hole. I mean, Phil Sean is probably a big part of it, or has always been a big part of it. But as I say, I think they worked hard, really sort of made it a Gentle Giant album that they could be proud of, and label it as a Gentle Giant album. And I don't think this was a bad album at all. I think it was one of their. Yeah, I still think it's one of their really good albums. And each piece of music in there is Gentle Giant. I mean, it just sounds like Gentle Giant.
Yes.
It feels like Gentle Giant. So if it looks like Gentle Giant, it sounds like Gentle Giant. It's Gentle Giant, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, there was a bit of a hole in it, but still a great album. Still a great album.
And I think that's a really interesting point about sort of prog music, music in generally. But if we just talk about prog music, there's people using the word idealect. So what that means is, when you hear it, can you instantly recognize it as, even if you've never heard the album before, the track before, you listen to the first minute, 30 seconds of the Gentle Giant album, go, this is Gentle Giant, isn't it? Well, how do you know that? Well, it has to be. It sounds so much like them. If not, it's somebody doing a very good pastiche of them. So I think they've got a very definite style. Whereas I would contend you got bands like King Crimson, who they're so different that you could put one track on and the next, and it's like I don't know where they're going next. Yeah, and I think it's much harder to sort of pin Crimson down. Certainly the era we're talking about now changes a bit with the Discipline era, I think. But it's interesting, isn't it? You can hear some bands and instantly recognize them as being this is clearly, whereas some bands it's a bit harder to work out who they are. So Gentle Giant have got a very clear sound. It's them. And if you like Gentle Giant, you're going to like this album.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a perfect way of actually summing it up. If you like Gentle Giant, you're going to like this album, even though they might have faded a little bit, as I went through after this. But In the Glass House, I think is a great album. Next album. Or next track was Can You Understand from Ashes Are Burning album from Renaissance.
Oh, I've got Birds of Fire on my list, Andy. Oh dear.
I've got Birds of Fire on my list as well. Oh, is that beforehand?
I was very proudly holding up the Birds of Fire album, and you started talking about Renaissance. I thought, oh my word, it shows how much attention I've been paying.
No, you're actually right. Next album on the list was Birds of Fire. Birds of Fire by Mahavishnu Orchestra. So let's do that one first before the Renaissance one. Again, this is one of those albums that I don't know whether I just sort of chanced by it or it wasn't probably on my radar at the time. I remember hearing a Mahavishnu song from around someone's house and saying, well, that's not prog, that's jazz, don't really understand it. Probably won't pursue it and things like that. But it's one of those things like an earworm. I heard it, and I think the first track I ever heard was One World, which starts again because I'm a drummer. It starts off with this snare roll, which sort of builds from really light and just builds and builds and builds, and then launches into this music. And that track One World really blew me away. And I actually put that on to the part 2 of the show. But the track I put on here was Birds of Fire, the first track on the album. But every single bloody track on this is brilliant. It's again a real big favourite of mine. Sapphire Bullets of Pure Love, Thousand Island Park, One World, Sanctuary, just fantastic tracks. I mean, it's really John McLaughlin's album. I think most of the stuff that Mahavishnu did was primarily written by him, but it's incredible. Billy Cobham on drums. I mean, I've also got on the second show a Billy Cobham album from his Spectrum album, his solo album,
which is great as well.
It is.
Spectrum is a brilliant album, but Billy Cobham. But there was Herbie Hancock was doing good stuff. Chick Corea, Return to Forever. There was a whole load of this type of, and I was so glad to see this on the list. I really was, because this is one of the great albums, I think. So anyone listening who hasn't heard the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Birds of Fire, you're in for a treat, because I think it's absolutely brilliant. You got 5 virtuosi combining together. This is where the sum of the parts is certainly, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And life experiences over the years, people have said to me, "Hey, you seem to like some weird shit, man. Play me something." And a number of times I've said, "Okay, let's start track 1, side 1 of this album." And if you get it, but most people just like, this is too. But people listening to this, I think, will get it. And it is a mind-blowing album. It's absolutely fantastic. McLaughlin is on fire, but all of them, their interplay, Jerry Goodman coming in just the right time, and the virtuosity. I mean, I said about ELP and brain salad surgery being a level so far beyond ever I could aspire to. I mean, this likewise. I mean, no way. I mean, what these guys were doing. And then you find out that Jan Hammer was the guy that did the Miami Vice theme, and it all sort of falls apart. But so people who don't think this is progressive rock, then I disagree. This is progressive. This is pushing boundaries. This is saying, well, we're going to do what we want to do, and we're going to do it very well. A fantastic album.
Let's talk about that for a second. This concept of what is progressive rock. I don't want to go into a long conversation here about this, but a lot of people sort of have this perception. Probably quite rightly so, that progressive rock is a certain type of thing. But if you take just the music that we've been talking about today, I mean, just today, Pink Floyd are completely different to Camel. They're completely different to S and ELP. ELP is completely different. Gentle Giant is completely different. Renaissance are completely different. Genesis are completely different. Every single, and we're going to talk about Pete Hamill as well. And Pete Hamill is nothing like Genesis and Yes and all those things. So every single band is completely different. They come from different places. It's like the argument about Kansas, whether Kansas are a progressive rock band. I was doing a talk in front of an audience about progressive rock, and the person I was talking to said, because I mentioned Kansas, and they said, well, that's not really progressive rock. And I said, look, what Kansas did is exactly the same sort of thing, not the same music, but the same sort of thing as what, say, Genesis did. Genesis took all their background, their Englishness, their schooling and all that sort of stuff. They took all that and they put it onto record. Their imagination took them onto record, but it all comes from their upbringing, where they come from. And Kansas did exactly the same sort of thing. They're American, and they've got 250 years of history, and they just put all the stuff, the old going across America to the west and all that sort of stuff, and violins. But it's fiddles in Kansas. It's not violin, it's fiddles. So they're taking all the stuff that they had in their background and putting it onto music. So yeah, they're a progressive rock band. They used to be. I think they've gone a little bit sort of rocky nowadays. But although I heard one of the the tracks off the new album, Absence of Presence, and it's really, really good. It's
I agree with you. The new album is a good listen to. I wouldn't put it up there as a progressive rock album, but the early stuff, certainly if you talk to American music fans, they will say that Kansas and Styx, for example, were progressive rock as far as they were concerned. Most Americans I speak to would say that they recognise that the bands that we were talking about, the English British bands, would be the sort of archetypal ones. But if they were to say, no, this is what we offered the prog world, they would definitely put Kansas and Sticks up there.
Yeah.
And as for what,
with Mahavishnu though, I mean, Mahavishnu Orchestra, yes, it comes from a jazz background. Listen to the bloody album. I mean, if this is progressive rock of a different sort of ilk, it's not like Genesis. It's not like what some people might want to sort of pigeonhole progressive rock, but this is jazz rock. It comes from a jazz background. They're jazz musicians, but the album is a progressive rock, jazz rock album, and it's absolutely astonishing. Just got a different sound to it, and the sound it has, I love.
Yeah, and it's their best album. I've got probably 4 of theirs, and that's the best for me. That's trying to think. In a Mounting Flame, I think was next one, wasn't it? And anyway, yeah.
Well,
really good.
Came just before it. And then we got Birds of Fire.
That was it.
Because we talked about In a Mounting Flame last time. Because I put that a track from that on the show as well. I just love it.
Yep.
I don't care what people say, to be honest. To me, it's progressive rock, and it's going on my progressive rock show. I don't care. Next one.
Ashes are Burning.
Next one is Renaissance. This is the Ashes Are Burning album.
Yeah.
Are you a Renaissance fan?
Kinda. I like their stuff. We've been talking off air about Northern Lights. So the first time I actually heard them was that album. So I then went back into the early stuff, Scheherazade and other stories and stuff like that. As we said before, Annie Haslam's voice is astonishing. The orchestration, the instrumentation is fantastic. This album was a bit sort of folkier to me. You're more of a Renaissance aficionado than I am. So having heard it, I think I read, or because the guitar was slightly, is it Andy Powell from Wishbone Ash, I think, was playing on this track. I think I heard or researched or something. Anyway, that's what my memory tells me.
I don't think Andy Powell was. He actually was on this. He was on this. Yes, he was. This is yes, I remember now. He was on this. Played a. What did he play on? I think it's on Ashes Are Burning track. I think he played. If I remember rightly, I think it was on Ashes Are Burning. Yeah. But this has got to be probably one of the top Renaissance albums. It's again, if you put them into top 10s, they're going to be. This is going to be in the top 3 for me. I just love it. I love John Camp's bass lines. I love John Tout's keyboard. It sounds so Renaissance to me, this album. I just love this. And I am sort of a big fan. I got into Renaissance through my bass player, Vic Wilson. Vic used to go on about Renaissance, and I finally sort of went, okay, I'll listen to those as well. I'll go and get some stuff from Renaissance, and I started listening to it. And actually, what I did, I borrowed a couple of albums from him, and I think I've still got one of his. Don't tell him. But I started listening to it, and again, it was one of those things because Renaissance sound completely different to everybody else. Again, great progressive rock, but there's a vibe about Renaissance that changed the way I thought about music again, and it just blew me away. And if you think about the tracks on here, I mean, just Carpet of the Sun is just a fantastic track. Ashes Are Burning is a fantastic track. But can you understand, every time I put this album on, can you understand, is the track that I associate with this album the most, which is why I put it on the show. And I just love it. I think it's one of their top albums.
You're listening to the ProgAxia podcast.
Okay, well, let's get on to the next choice. And let's go and find the albums. If I can find them, I've got them here somewhere.
There you go.
Selling England by the pound. Selling England by the bloody pound.
Yeah. Ah, my word. It's got lyric sheets. That's good.
Yeah, got the lyric sheet.
So, I mean, I can remember when somebody first plays me Seconds Out. And again, it was one of those moments in time which, like, I'm never going to forget where I am when this moment took place. Absolutely fantastic. And some of the highlights of that album were, the cinema show. And it told a story. It took me. The musicianship seemed superb. It had dynamic to it. It talked about Romeo and Juliet. So for a minute there, I thought I knew what was going on, and then I was trying to work out what a chocolate surprise was. I did eventually work that one out. Talked about Father Tiresias, and no one at school seemed to know who he was either. So, but I mean, what dynamic to it it builds, and that live version, we're talking about the studio version here, but now the live version, the way that Tony Banks builds it up and comes to that crescendo. I mean, as a young boy, it's a pretty orgasmic moment, I've got to say, Andy. I mean, it was just said so much. And then this album, we talked about, I ranted a bit about the artwork on the previous album, which didn't quite hit it for me. But this was a beautiful painting, and I think was it Peter and Tony that had gone up to town and met Betty Sonic and talked to her into letting them have. But then it's selling England by the pound. Oh, that's a pun I can get, And Isle of Plenty. Oh, I can get that as well. And Dancing with the Moonlit Night. Oh, Citizens of Hope of Glory. And I was bought into it. And Battle of Epping Forest, and it's interesting track, too much going on, but there's a story there, and there's lots of music there, and again bursting with creativity. And First and Fifth, wow, that guitar solo, brilliant album, absolutely. Cinema show, Isle of Plenty, Pest cooperating, taking the safe way home.
Cooperates. Love that.
Exactly.
I know. Words is superb.
Yeah, Liquid Len in the Battle of Epping Forest. I mean, it all comes back so vividly, even after 40 years. I mean, it's fantastic. Great choice. Cinema show. Romeo locks his basement flat and scurries up the stairs. Yeah, I mean, and you got those little bits of percussion going on. Phil Collins, hitting funny things and making funny sounds, and it didn't get boring at any minute for me. It was just like, this is going somewhere. I know it is, and I'm along for the ride. Love the track, brilliant track.
Yeah, I mean, just as a bit of a disclaimer, me and you are massive Genesis fans.
Yeah,
and for a very good reason. Genesis are probably one of the most consistent progressive rock bands ever. Right from the very first album, what I call the very first album, the Trespass album.
Yeah. Trespass up to Wind and Wuthering. Brilliant.
Yeah, right up to Wind and Wuthering, complete Genesis. Yeah. Beyond that, there's some good stuff and stuff I'm not so it just doesn't really bake my cookies. But I had a chat with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and we we're talking about doing a little thing about doing Genesis albums, and the top 10 Genesis albums, from just the worst to the best.
Yeah.
And we decided not to do it because it's an impossible task. Because I like them all. I like them all basically of equal measure for different reasons. So you can see right through time how they evolved the sound and changed. And if you are a Genesis fan, you may have gone into this little hole that I went into, where I was following the band's progress by the keyboards that Tony Banks got, because on the first album it's one, you've got your Moogs and your electric pianos and things like that. But by the time they got to 78 and through, it was using the pro soloists and all those sort of things. But the album, I mean, we got you talk about all these tracks on this album, Dancing with the Moonlit Night, classic. I Know What I Like, a brilliant live track, because they can expand it, and this is where Phil Collins did his amazing tambourine dance when I first went to see them.
Abusing Mike Rutherford, yes.
Abusing Mike Rutherford's head and things like that. But First and Fifth is absolutely astonishing. And Battle of Epping Forest, I know it's too busy, and people will say it's too busy and things like that, but I listen to it and I love it.
Mm.
I sing all the way through. I actually mentioned this to a mate of mine online, and we had a little virtual talk. And because we talked about this Genesis album, he just verbatim went through all the lyrics of Epping Forest. He just, for the first 2 or 3 minutes of that conversation, he was just saying the lyrics from his head of the Battle of Epping Forest, and it's like, and it's incredible. And then after the ordeal, Cinema Show and Isle of Plenty. On the show, on this show, I put Cinema Show and Isle of Plenty because I can't play Isle of Plenty after Cinema. I can't not play Isle of
Right.
Plenty after Cinema Show. It's just
goes out,
flows
yeah.
in and it's part of it, as far as I'm concerned. But I think from a position of where this album sits in the sort of, I don't know, the prog Hall of Fame, got to be right up there.
Whenever they do polls, Andy, this and Close to the Edge, Yes is Close to the Edge, always, in the top 5, if not the top 3, these two always up there.
Yeah.
And I just did a quick count in my head. So I think Trespass through to Wind and Wuthering, I think that's 7 studio albums on the bounce. All of them. I mean, that's pretty high quality control, isn't it? Yeah. And just thinking about some of the other bands we could mention, could they reel 7 off the bounce like that?
75 was the only year that they didn't actually bring an album out, because Peter Gabriel left in 74, but they brought 2 out in 76.
Yeah.
They brought Trigger the Tail at the beginning and Wind Mother in at the end of 76. So that's what I'm saying. They're the most consistent band, completely consistent band every single year of the 70s, 2 in 76. So you could say every year of the 70s, because Trigger the Tail came out quite early in 76. And so
I think Wuthering was about November, I think, that year.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Genesis always did well, I think, over that period of time was, from the first track, always a great start to an album. And Dancing with the Moonlit Nights, when you've got Peter Gabriel just singing to begin with, and then the bass comes in, and then and it's like, it gets you by the ball straight away. It's like, it's got something which all seems a little bit fade to begin with, and then it rocks. And it's like, brilliant.
Yeah, every single track on it a winner as far. Even Epping Forest is a winner for me. Next track on here was Peter Hamill, and this came off the Chameleon in the Shadow of the Night album, and it's I think it's the last track on it. So I think it's one of the longest tracks on there, Black Room. I love Peter Hamill's vocals, always have done. This album for me was really a Van de Graaff generator album. Like a lot of his solo albums, he used basically all the guys from Van de Graaff. I don't, and maybe it was contractual. I don't really know. Maybe it was something which he wanted to do and put out himself. But the people he always reached out to were the guys in Van de Graaff. So again, this is a very, very different album from a lot of the stuff that was going on at the time. And it's, to me, Peter Hamill is always a lot darker and a lot more guttural.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those, when you talk to progressive rock fans, Van de Graaff is a bit of a Marmite band. I've fallen on the side of completely loving them. Because you got because there's no guitar on it, so it gives it a different sort. All these things give a different sort of sound. I mean, if there's guitars, it's going to be Peter Hamill that plays any acoustic stuff and electric stuff on there. But it's sort of lacking guitar hero stuff, heroics. There's no massive guitar solos and things like that. So it gives it a completely different sound. There's a lot of Mellotron, a lot of Hammond on this, and David Jackson's brilliant sax and flute stuff that goes over the top of it. But it's such a different sounding album because of the way it's written, the way Hamill writes. It's different.
Mm.
And once you actually start getting into it, and when I started getting into it with tracks like Refugees and stuff like that,
Yeah.
that's where I've sort of really really liked his voice, and everything just cuts through this. But it's quite dark, it's always been a little bit edgy with Hamill, and this album's no different. It's a solo album, but again, it's a Van de Graaff Generator album as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned.
And just to that point, I mean, that's one that I thought one of the great things about these sort of solo albums is that these band members were happy to support each other's work, weren't they? I mean, Wakeman's earlier album, Six Wives, Squire is on it, Alan White's on it, Steve Howe's on it. There's nothing for John to sing, unfortunately. No, on this album, it's Van de Graaff Generator because the guys are on helping him out. And I first got exposed to Van de Graaff Generator on a Charisma sampler type, and it had Theme 1 on it, which used to be the Friday Rock Show. And so, oh yeah, cool, yeah, I like this, blah, blah, blah. And I think you could argue that was actually the first song to be played on Radio 1, not The Move, because that was used to introduce the program. So there we go. That's a trivia fact, allegedly. Anyway, so having heard Theme 1, and then hearing my sort of first, whether it's a Plague of Lighthouse Keepers or whatever it was, I was going, this isn't like what I was, and it took me a little while to come back to it. And it is darker. It is more intense. Now the contrast between this and Cinema Show, I mean, playing them back to back, there's a contrast there. And I was describing some Van de Graaff Generator Hamill music to someone, and to me it's quite angular, whereas Genesis is more pastoral, it's more idyllic, it's more sort of rounded. This stuff is angular and it's angry, and you can see why Johnny Rotten, as he was, actually said, you know what, that Hamill stuff, Nadia's Last Chance, yeah, I liked it. And you can see how this stuff is closer to the punk stuff. And punk and prog never really fell out as much as the music press liked to portray, So it's an angry. I mean, he comes across as sort of an intense, sort of angry person. But I agree with you. It's Marmite, and I like Marmite. And so Hamill stuff, and he's still prolific. He's still churning stuff out, and his quality is still very good. And regrettably, I've never seen him live, and I can imagine it'd be quite a draining experience. But up for that, because I think when you get in his world for a while, then you probably need a drink and a lie down afterwards, both which you still manage. It isn't an easy listen, but like it's great. I mean, if you're drawn in, you stay drawn in. I would suggest.
Yeah, I think as I say, I mean, it is a bit of a Marmite thing, but that track in the Black Room was actually going to be included on a Van de Graaff Generator. In fact, Van de Graaff used to play it live.
Yeah.
So that's why to me, this whole album is a sort of Van de Graaff album with a little bit of latitude. There's sort of more of Hamill's sort of fingers into the darkness sort of concepts here. But it was going to go on to an album that was going to follow up from Pawn Hearts.
Yeah.
But obviously they didn't sort of get back together again, and so that's sort of into that. But it was a Van de Graaff album. Yeah. Last track on the show I put on, and the reason why I put this on is because this is I put on there's a Green Slade album, the very first Green Slade album, and I put on an English Western on there. Not because I think it's the best track on the album, because I don't think it's probably the best track on the album, but it's the track that I heard first and I got into first, and it's typical of Dave Greenslade. It's whimsical and it's a little bit strange, but the music's brilliant on it. And I remember seeing the album when I was a kid, probably about sort of 74, 75, something like that. And I'd seen this album. Again, it's got this beautiful Roger Dean cover. Roger Dean seemed to be doing everything for everybody at the time. It's Whitehead, who actually did the last album, which was the Pete Hamill album. He did, I think it was Whitehead. It actually did the cover for that. So it was Whitehead or Roger Dean.
Yeah.
I saw this album and I bought it because I just liked the album, and it was like the Yes albums and all that sort of thing. So I bought it because of the cover. I didn't know who Greenslade were. I didn't know their background. I didn't know their upbringing. I didn't know who they were or anything like that. And when I first put it on, I didn't really like it. It was a bit too light and whimsy. Over the years, I've got to love it. I've got to love it, and I do like Greenslade. They're a different type of album. They're a different type of band. I think sort of more brought up in that sort of Canterbury sort of vibe, I guess.
Yeah, and I think part of that Canterbury stuff does come through because to me, I'd say a bit jazzy as well. There's some sort of jazzy stuff going on in the style. Because Greenslade was also Pentateuch of the Cosmogon, wasn't that Greenslade as well? I think later on.
Yes, a lot of these bands like Greenslade, because they're not like the big bands in my life. This is one of those ones. I mean, I've got a couple of Greenslade albums, but this track, this one album, did make a big difference to me. When it was one of those albums that was always in my record collection, and I always pulled it out every so often. You got Dave Lawson do with some great keyboards, and Dave Greenslade with the keyboards and things like that. But it was just one of those albums that really was of the time. I don't think if I was to do top, they'd be in my top 100 albums. But they'd be quite low down because there's so much great stuff, and I don't think that Greenslade ever really cut it as a big iconic band. But they're there, and this album was pretty good, and for the year it was done, I think it was pretty astonishing. Because you got things like Sundance on there and stuff like that, which I really like, and Drowning Man and things. But an English Western was it was always a B-side. I remember talking to someone who was a really big Greenslade fan. He was talking about they used to do singles. I think Feathered Friends was a single, and an English Western was always the B-side because it was always a little bit quirky. Then they thought they'd bring people in because so it was a beat. They had a few different singles, and an English Western was always a B-side of a single. So I thought it's decent on a B-side.
Now, can I put up a few honourable mentions because we've got to the end of the
absolutely.
Because I mean, it was such a good year, and I was just going through my collection and stuff. So, so for people out in YouTube land, where should we start? Well, I mean, think we've already talked about the band, but I mean, I can remember getting this. This is Genesis Live.
Yeah.
And one of the things I loved about it was just that bizarre, bonkers story on the back that Gabriel obviously wrote about, some instant on the tube. And it was just like, oh my! It was just stuff like that kind of brought me into it as well. So that was fun.
That story, was sort of part of the catalyst for him leaving.
Yeah, because you started getting into sort of trying to get into screenplays, and William Friedkin was trying to get him hot on the tail.
This is it. William Friedkin. This is what it is. William Friedkin sort of basically offered him to go and do something, and it was because of that storyline.
Yeah,
William Friedkin saw it and said he's got great imagination when we could do that, and I think it just pulled his attention away. This is when Lamb was going on, and so just as a bit of an aside, I mean that story. Yes, it's brilliant, and if no one's ever read it before, then go and get the album, bloody read it, because it's a weird story about this girl on the underground. It's such a weird story.
It's where his mind was at.
It was that story that started breaking him up.
Yeah. But talking of Friedkin, of course, there was a certain film, The Exorcist, and 73, Virgin. Where would we be? Where would Sir Richard, be without that album? here was another great one. I don't know if you're a fan of Eno's. I mean, he famously calls himself a non-musician. But Here Come the Warm Jets was out that year, and Baby's on Fire, fantastic. And again, you look at the roll call of musicians involved, and it's got Chris Spedding, of course it does. Who else has got? It's got Paul Wood, Andy Mackay. It's got Robert Fripp on it. I mean, Baby's on Fire, fantastic.
And if you think about it, Eno he's almost like the unsung hero of recording. You know, I mean, every so often you're getting an album and it's it's Eno, and he might not be playing on it. He may be just producing it or just coming up with ideas. But he's always been one of those guys he's in a studio. It's like, I mean, he did it with U2 and other bands like that. He just sort of turns up, flash of genius, off he goes again.
Well, he's credited on Lamb, isn't he? Because Waiting Room, I think the credit, it's off the top of my head, Andy, but I think they call it enosification. So he's credited with the enosification on Waiting Room. Yeah. So two final ones worthy mentions for me, opposite ends of the spectrum here. So now this is, talk about Marmalade. Talk about Marmite. Henry Cow.
Yeah.
Henry Cow, arguably one of the most progressive groups of all time. I mean, there's a group that did knew no boundaries. There we go. Always trying something. So this is legend. So if people don't know Henry Cow, I mean, this is stuff that's really, really on the edge, I would suggest. Where Frith and Hodgkinson were going, but this is a very important album for its time, and it's rock in opposition type stuff.
Can I tell you before you go into the next one? I got this album. This is a Virgin Taster album.
Oh yeah.
It's called So What, and for anybody who's not watching on the YouTube channel, it's basically like a V sign. Cover, but it was a taster album, and I don't even know. And this is how I got into, people like Robert Wyatt and Henry Cow and Steve Hillage, all that sort of stuff. Hatfield in the North. I mean, have a look at this. This is a taster of all the Virgin artists. And this is how I sort of got into a lot of that stuff. Especially Steve Hillage. Steve Hillage blew me away. But it's got Tangerine Dream on. It's got Ivor Cutler on here as well. Ivor Cutler. Now, if anybody's completely bonkers, or from the outside is completely bonkers, it's going to be Ivor Cutler. But it's got Kevin Coyne on here and Mike Oldfield stuff, and there's so much stuff on this taster album. But that's where I started getting into things like Henry Cow and
Nice Enough to Eat was another one, wasn't it? I've got that as well somewhere. And so finally, a guilty pleasure. And this is a band that when people think of this band, they think of Diddy Wah Diddy and all that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or they think of Davies on the Road again. In between, Manfred Mann's Earth Band. One of the best gigs I've ever been to was Manfred Mann's Earth Band in about, mid to late 70s.
Right.
And these guys really did rock out. This was when Mick Rogers and Chris Thompson were involved. Mick Rogers at the time, and these guys could really play. And to me, it was kind of a guilty pleasure. It didn't have that sort of level of sophistication or intrigue or some of the other stuff we've talked about. But in terms of just good music that was good fun, and it was a bit soulful, and Manfred Mann knows his way around a keyboard. It was just, so it's a guilty pleasure of mine. In 73, Solar Fire came out, and they did 2 or 3 albums in a row. They had The Good Earth, they had Glorified Magnified, didn't they? They had what else did they have? The Roaring Silence, before they then started becoming a bit more commercial. They weren't worried about this was their album phase, not their singles phase.
That is a really good call. It's a great album. And they were a great band at the time. Absolutely fantastic band. I think a lot of these bands because they moved into more mainstream stuff. I think the people sort of forget them, but I'm glad you brought that up, because that album is a particularly good album as well.
Yeah.
Love that. Just on the because we're going to round this off now, but this is obviously going to be this is part one of our 1973. I might even cut this in half to be honest. This is a part one of it, so we'll have part one and two, and then we'll have part two, probably. I don't know.
It's a double album.
Double album. This is our tales. This is our tales from Topographic Oceans, 1973. Who'd have thunk it, eh? But in the next one, I'm going to be talking about Jethro Tull, a passion play. Oh my God, I love that album so much. I don't know why. Because this is one again. It's a Marmite sort of album for a lot of Tull fans, but I love it. I absolutely love it. Ronnie Pilgrim, what a bless him. We're going to talk about Billy Cobham's Spectrum album as well. We're going to talk about Gong, King Crimson's Larks, Tongues and Aspects. Obviously, I mean you can sort of go off on that, but I've got some really good insight into that as well, which I want to talk about because I do love that. That is one of the albums I really do love. I think it's a fantastic album.
Yeah.
We're also going to talk about the live album, the Yes Live album, a little bit, Elohim Caravan and things like that. So there's lots to talk about on part two of the 1973 journey.
Yeah, spoiler alert, I replayed just by chance actually that Caravan album recently, and I suddenly remembered just how good it was and how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I've reappraised it as actually being better than the Land of Grey and Pink. So there we go.
This is a very bizarre thing because that's what happens when you do these sort of things, these sort of shows. You go back and you love stuff, but when you go, it's like when I'm doing the actual show when I'm playing the tracks.
Yeah.
There's some albums I haven't listened to for like 5 years or 6 years or 10 years or something like that. I know I like the time, and I thought so. I play them again, and I think, oh my God, I've forgotten how good this is.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think Girls Grow Plump in the Night, I think, is a stunning album.
Yeah.
So we're definitely...
keep that powder dry, Andy.
Yes, next time. Anyway, we'll talk about it next time. We'll see everybody later. We'll come and join us on the next the part two of 1973's reviews. Yeah. And if you've got any queries, any questions, stick them in comments. We're on YouTube. We're on ProgAxia. Just search for ProgAxia, which is ProgAxia on YouTube. And go and have a listen to the Rockin' Rebel radio show over on MixCloud as well. We'll put all the links below, but until next time, we'll see you guys later.